The knock came after dark. Not the kind of knock a man expects when he lives 20 miles from the nearest town, when the wind howls through the canyon and the only visitors are coyotes and dust. This knock was soft, hesitant, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they had the right to be there at all. Caleb Mercer set down his coffee, the tin cup still warm against his knuckles. The fire in the hearth popped once, throwing shadows against the rough timber walls. He didn't move right away. Out here, a knock after dark could mean trouble, law or outlaw, it didn't always matter which. He reached for the rifle leaning against the doorframe, not lifting it, just letting his hand rest near the stock. Then he opened the door. A woman stood in the threshold, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide and glassy with exhaustion. She wore a traveling coat that had once been fine, but was now streaked with trail dust and frayed at the hem. In her arms, wrapped in a threadbare quilt, was a child, a girl, no more than 4, her head resting against the woman's shoulder, half asleep. Behind them, the night stretched vast and empty. "Please," the woman said, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Just one night in the barn." Caleb's gaze moved past her, scanning the darkness. No horse, no wagon, nothing but the two of them, standing there like ghosts pulled from the prairie itself. "You walked here?" he asked. She nodded, swaying slightly on her feet. The child stirred, whimpering softly, and the woman tightened her grip, steadying herself with visible effort. Caleb looked at them, really looked. The woman's hands were blistered, her boots caked in mud and something darker. Blood, maybe. The child's face was flushed, her breathing shallow and uneven. They weren't just tired, they were running. He glanced at the barn, then back at the woman. She met his eyes, and in hers he saw something he recognized, the quiet desperation of someone who had nothing left to bargain with except the truth. "The barn's no place for a child," he said finally. The woman's face crumpled just for a moment before she pulled it back together. "We won't be any trouble, I promise, just till morning. We'll be gone before you wake." Caleb stepped aside, pulling the door open wider. "Take the bed," he said. She stared at him, uncomprehending. "Inside," he continued, nodding toward the small room beyond the hearth. "There's a bed, take it." "We can't." "You can," his voice was firm, not unkind. "I'll sleep by the fire, go on." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, as if afraid the offer might vanish, she stepped inside. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around her, and Caleb saw the way her shoulders sagged, the weight of miles falling away all at once. He closed the door behind them and bolted it. The woman stood in the center of the room, clutching the child, her eyes darting around as if memorizing every corner, every exit. Caleb moved to the stove, ladling water into a kettle and setting it to heat. "There's bread on the table," he said, not looking at her. "Not much, but it's fresh enough." She didn't respond right away. When he finally glanced over, he saw her staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite name, gratitude, maybe, or disbelief, or something closer to fear. "Why?" she whispered. Caleb turned back to the stove. "Why what?" "Why let us in? You don't know us." He shrugged. "Don't need to." The kettle began to hiss. He poured the hot water into a basin, set it on the table along with a clean cloth. "Wash up if you want. I'll heat some stew." The woman lowered the child onto the bench near the fire, carefully unwrapping the quilt. The girl blinked up at her mother, her cheeks feverish and damp. The woman touched her forehead, her lips pressing into a thin line. "She's sick," Caleb said, "not a question." "Fever," the woman admitted. "It's been 3 days." Caleb nodded slowly. He'd seen fever take children before, seen it take strong men too. Out here, sickness didn't care who you were. He filled a bowl with stew from the pot hanging over the fire and set it in front of the woman. She stared at it like it was something holy. "Eat," he said. She picked up the spoon with trembling hands, brought it to her lips, and stopped. Her eyes filled with tears, though she didn't let them fall. She looked at the child instead, then back at the bowl. "Her first," she said quietly. Caleb filled a second bowl, smaller, and set it beside the first. The woman dipped a piece of bread into the broth, blew on it gently, and held it to the girl's lips. The child took a small bite, then another, her eyes fluttering closed. They ate in silence. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls, but inside, the warmth held steady. When the woman finally spoke again, her voice was hoarse. "We won't trouble you past morning, I swear it." Caleb leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Where are you head?" "Day." She hesitated. "West." "That's a long walk." "We'll manage." "Not with a sick child, you won't." Her jaw tightened. "We'll manage," she repeated, harder this time. Caleb didn't push. He'd learned long ago that some people carried burdens they wouldn't share, no matter how heavy they got. He stood, moved to the back room, and returned with a wool blanket. "Bed's through there," he said, nodding toward the doorway. "Get some rest." The woman lifted the child into her arms and carried her toward the room. At the threshold, she paused, glancing back. "Thank you," she said softly. Caleb nodded once. She disappeared into the darkness beyond, and he heard the creak of the bed frame, the rustle of fabric settling. He sat by the fire, the rifle resting across his knees, and listened to the night. Outside, something moved. It was faint, just the scrape of a boot against stone, maybe, or the shift of leather. Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle. He waited, motionless, his breathing slow and even. Nothing. But he didn't relax, because out here, nothing often meant something, and whatever had brought that woman and her child to his door in the dead of night wasn't finished with them yet. He added another log to the fire and settled in to wait. Morning came quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Caleb woke to pale light filtering through the window, the fire reduced to embers. His back ached from sleeping upright in the chair, but he didn't move right away. He listened first, footsteps, voices, anything that didn't belong. Silence. He stood, stretched the stiffness from his shoulders, and moved toward the back room. The door was open, just a crack. Through it, he could see the woman sitting on the edge of the bed, her hand resting on the child's forehead. The girl was still asleep, her breathing steadier now, her fever broken. The woman looked up as Caleb approached, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer than they'd been the night before. "She's better," Caleb said. The woman nodded. The rest helped. He stepped into the doorway but didn't cross the threshold. "There's coffee on the stove, help yourself." She rose slowly, as if testing whether her legs would hold her. "We'll leave soon, like I said." "Stay another day." The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, he didn't take them back. The woman stared at him, her mouth opening, then closing. "We can't," she said finally. "You can. You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She shook her head, crossing her arms over her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. "You've already done more than. Is someone looking for you?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp and unavoidable. The woman's face went pale, and Caleb knew he'd guessed right. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "We'll be gone by noon." "It matters if they show up here." She flinched. "They won't." "You sure about that?" She wasn't. He could see it in the way her hands trembled, the way her eyes darted toward the window, as if expecting shadows to appear at any moment. Caleb stepped back, giving her space. "I'm not asking what you did, not asking what you're running from, but if trouble's coming, I'd rather know than be caught blind." The woman sank back onto the bed, her shoulders curling inward. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice so low he almost missed it. "Her father." Caleb waited. "He's not a good man," she swallowed hard. "I tried to leave before, twice. He found me both times, brought me back, said if I ever tried again," her voice broke. "He said he'd take her from me, said I'd never see her again." The child stirred in her sleep, and the woman reached out, smoothing the tangled hair from her face. "So you ran," Caleb said. "So I ran," She looked up at him, her eyes fierce despite the fear. And I'm not going back. I don't care what he does to me, but I won't let him have her. Caleb nodded slowly. He'd known men like that, men who thought love was the same as ownership, who measured their worth by how tightly they could hold onto things. He'd seen what they left behind. How far back is he? I don't know, a day, maybe two. We covered our tracks as best we could, but, she trailed off, shaking her head. He's good at finding things. Caleb moved to the window, looking out over the empty stretch of land that surrounded his cabin. No movement, no dust trails, not yet. You need rest, he said, both of you, another day at least, maybe two. We can't. You can, he turned to face her. You collapse out there, you won't make it 10 miles, and if he's as good as you say, he'll find you before sundown. The woman's jaw tightened. And if he comes here? Then I'll deal with it. You don't know what you're saying. Maybe not, Caleb crossed his arms, but I know what happens to people who run themselves into the ground, and I know what happens to children who don't get the care they need. He nodded toward the sleeping girl. She's getting better, but she's not well, not yet. The woman looked at her daughter, and something in her face softened. Why are you doing this? Caleb didn't answer right away. He thought about the question, turned it over in his mind like a stone. I don't know, he said finally, maybe because someone should. She stared at him, searching his face for something, deceit, maybe, or expectation. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't seem to find it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she nodded. One more day, she said, but if there's any sign of him, any sign at all, we leave. Fair enough. Caleb left her there and walked back to the main room. He poured himself coffee, black and bitter, and stood by the window, watching the horizon. He wasn't a fool. He knew what he was risking, knew that kindness, out here, could cost a man everything. But he also knew that some things mattered more than safety. Some things you couldn't turn your back on, no matter how much easier it would be. By midday, the woman had emerged from the back room, the child walking slowly beside her. The girl's fever had broken completely, her cheeks still flushed, but her eyes brighter. She clung to her mother's hand, watching Caleb with quiet curiosity. She wants to thank you, the woman said. Caleb glanced at the child, then knelt down so he was closer to her height. You feeling better? The girl nodded, her voice small. Yes, sir. Good. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved horse, no bigger than his thumb. He'd whittled it months ago during a long winter night when sleep wouldn't come. You like horses? Her eyes widened. She nodded again, more eagerly this time. He held it out, and she took it carefully, cradling it in both hands like it was made of glass. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb stood, his chest tight in a way he didn't quite understand. You're welcome. The woman's eyes were wet again, but this time she didn't try to hide it. That afternoon, Caleb rode out to check the perimeter, scanning the land for any sign of movement. He found nothing, no tracks, no riders, no dust on the wind, but the unease stayed with him, coiled tight in his gut. When he returned, the woman and child were sitting by the fire, the girl playing quietly with the carved horse while her mother watched. Caleb didn't say anything. He just added wood to the fire and checked the bolt on the door. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. And somewhere, in the distance, hoofbeats began their slow, inevitable approach. The horses came at dusk. Caleb saw the dust first, a thin line rising against the horizon like smoke from a dying fire. He'd been watching for it all afternoon, that telltale sign of riders moving fast. Now that it was here, his heartbeat didn't quicken. It steadied. He turned from the window and found the woman standing in the doorway to the back room, her face drained of color. Is it him? Caleb asked. She nodded, her lips pressed into a bloodless line. How many does he ride with? 2, maybe 3. Her voice was barely a whisper. Brothers, they do whatever he tells them. Caleb moved to the mantel, where his gun belt hung on a peg. He buckled it on, checked the revolver's cylinder, then reached for the rifle. The woman watched him with wide eyes, her hands twisting together. "Take the girl into the back room," he said calmly. "Close the door, don't come out unless I tell you." "He'll kill you," her voice cracked. "He'll kill you and then he'll take her and—" "He won't." Caleb met her gaze, his voice steady. "Go on now, keep her quiet." For a moment, the woman didn't move. Then she turned and disappeared into the back room. He heard the soft murmur of her voice, soothing the child, followed by the creak of the door closing. Caleb walked to the window and looked out. 3 riders. They moved in a loose line, unhurried, confident. The one in the center sat taller than the others, his shoulders broad, his hat pulled low. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the way he carried himself, like a man who'd never been told no and wouldn't recognize it if he was. They slowed as they approached the cabin, spreading out slightly. Caleb watched their hands. None had drawn yet, but they would. Men like this always did. The lead rider stopped 20 yards from the door. He sat his horse easily, looking the cabin over like he was appraising livestock. "You in there?" he called out. His voice was deep, rough-edged. "I'm looking for my wife and my daughter." Caleb didn't answer. He stood to the side of the window, rifle in hand, watching. "I know they're here," the man continued. "Saw their tracks. Now I don't want any trouble. Just send them out and we'll be on our way." Still, Caleb said nothing. The man's jaw tightened. "You hear me?" One of the other riders shifted in his saddle, his hand drifting toward his gun. The lead rider raised a hand, stopping. "Gee him." "Listen," he said, his tone shifting softer now, almost reasonable. "I don't know what she told you. Women get ideas, you know how it is, but she's my wife. That girl's my blood. I got a right to them." Caleb stepped into the doorway, the rifle resting across his chest. The 3 men tensed, their eyes locking onto him. "You got no rights here," Caleb said quietly. The lead rider leaned forward in his saddle, squinting. "That's so. That's so. You know who I am." "Don't care." A flicker of anger passed over the man's face, but he smoothed it away, replacing it with a cold smile. "Name's Dolan, Jack Dolan, maybe you've heard it." Caleb shook his head. "Can't say I have." Dolan's smile thinned. "Well, now you have, and now you know that when I say I'm taking my family home, I mean it. They're not going anywhere." The rider on the left spoke up, his voice high and nasal. "Hell, Jack, let's just—" "Shut up, Toby." Dolan's eyes never left Caleb. "You're making a mistake, friend." "I'm not your friend," Caleb said, "and you're not welcome here. Turn around, ride out." "Not without them." "Then I guess you're not riding out." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around the horses' hooves. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its cry thin and lonesome. Dolan's hand moved slowly toward his gun. "Don't," Caleb said. Dolan froze. Then slowly he raised both hands, palms out. But the look in his eyes didn't change. It sharpened, hardened, turned to something mean. "You got a name?" Dolan asked. "Mercer." "Well, Mercer, you seem like a reasonable man, so let me put it to you plain. That woman in there, she's mine. She don't get to leave just because she's got some fool notion in her head. And if you're thinking you can play hero, you ought to know I got friends, lots of them. You might turn me away today, but tomorrow, next week, I'll be back, and I won't be asking nice." Caleb shifted the rifle slightly, just enough that the barrel pointed more directly at Dolan's chest. "If you come back," Caleb said, "you won't leave." Dolan stared at him, his jaw working. Then slowly he nodded. "All right," he said. "All right, we'll go. But you remember this, Mercer. Whatever happens next, it's on you." He pulled his horse around, jerking the reins hard. The other 2 riders followed, casting glances back over their shoulders. They rode out slowly, deliberately, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Caleb stayed in the doorway until they disappeared over the ridge. Even then, he didn't lower the rifle. He stood there, watching, waiting for the dust to settle. Behind him, the door to the back room creaked open. The woman stepped out, the child clutching her hand. Are they gone? She asked, her voice shaking. For now. He'll come back. I know. She crossed the room to him, her face pale but determined. You should have let us go. This isn't your fight. Caleb finally lowered the rifle, turning to look at her. It is now. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Whatever she saw in his face made her close it again. Caleb moved past her, setting the rifle by the door. We need to be ready. If he comes back, it'll be soon, and next time he won't talk first. The woman nodded slowly. What do we do? We wait, Caleb said, and if he comes through that door, we make sure he regrets it. The child began to cry softly, and the woman knelt down, pulling her clothes. Caleb turned away, staring out the window at the darkening land. Somewhere out there, Jack Dolan was making plans, and Caleb knew, with the certainty that comes from hard experience, that blood was coming. The only question was whose. Night fell heavy and complete. Caleb built the fire higher than usual, enough to throw light into the corners and keep the shadows at bay. The woman sat near the hearth, the child curled in her lap, finally asleep after an hour of quiet tears. Neither of them had spoken much since the riders left. Words felt fragile, insufficient. Caleb checked the rifle again, more out of habit than necessity, then filled the coffee pot and set it over the fire. The woman watched him, her eyes distant, lost in some place he couldn't follow. You should eat something, he said. She shook her head. I'm not hungry. You need to keep your strength. For what? Her voice was flat, hollow. He's coming back, you know he is, and when he does, she trailed off, her arms tightening around the sleeping child. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the floor beside her. She didn't reach for it. He sat down across from her, his back against the wall, the rifle within easy reach. For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the soft whistle of wind through the eaves. What's her name? Caleb asked finally. The woman blinked, pulled from whatever dark place her mind had wandered. What? Your daughter, what's her name? Anna, the word came out soft, almost reverent. Her name's Anna. Anna, Caleb repeated. He looked at the child, her face peaceful in sleep, a small hand clutching the carved horse he'd given her. That's a good name. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She's all I have, the only good thing I ever. She stopped, swallowing hard. If he takes her from me, I don't know what I'll do. He won't. You can't promise that. No, Caleb admitted. I can't, but I can promise I'll do everything I can to stop him. She finally looked at him, really looked, her gaze searching. Why, you don't know us, this isn't your burden. Caleb was quiet for a moment, turning the question over. He thought about the life he'd lived before this cabin, before the solitude and silence. Thought about the choices he'd made, the things he'd seen, the people he'd failed to help when it mattered most. Maybe it should be, he said finally. The woman stared at him, something shifting in her expression, surprise, maybe, or understanding. I had a family once, Caleb continued, his voice low. A long time ago, wife and a boy, he was about Anna's age. He paused, the memories sharp even after all these years. There was a fire, I was out hunting miles away. By the time I got back, he stopped, shook his head. I wasn't there when they needed me. The woman's hand moved to her mouth. I'm sorry. I am too. He looked into the fire, watching the flames dance and twist. I told myself it was God's will, bad luck, whatever I needed to hear to keep going. But the truth is, I wasn't there, and I've carried that ever since. That wasn't your fault. Maybe not, but it doesn't change anything. He met her eyes again. I can't fix what happened to them, but I can make sure the same thing doesn't happen to you, to Anna. The woman's tears finally spilled over, silent and steady. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, then reached for the coffee. She took a sip, wincing at the bitterness, but didn't stop drinking. My name's Claire, she said quietly. Claire, Caleb repeated, nodding. It's good to know you. She almost smiled. You too, Caleb. They sat in silence for a while longer, the weight between them different now, lighter, somehow, despite the danger waiting outside. Shared burdens, Caleb thought, were easier to carry. Anna stirred in her mother's arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around, confused for a moment, then focused on Caleb. Are the bad men coming back? Claire's breath caught, but Caleb answered before she could. Maybe, but if they do, I won't let them hurt you. Promise. The word hung there, simple and absolute, the kind of promise a child asks for without understanding its weight. Caleb looked at her, at the trust in those wide eyes, and felt something crack open inside his chest. I promise, he said. Anna nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes again. Claire bent down and kissed her daughter's forehead, her lips lingering there. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Later, after Claire had carried Anna back to the bed and returned to sit by the fire, she spoke again. What will you do after? After what? After this is over, after we leave. Caleb shrugged. Same as before, I guess. Tend the land, keep to myself. That's no kind of life. It's the one I chose. Why? He considered the question, the fire casting shadows across his face. Because it's easier than the alternative. Which is? Caring, he said it simply, without bitterness. Caring about people, letting them in. It's easier to be alone than to risk losing someone again. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You're not as alone as you think. Caleb looked at her, saw the warmth in her eyes, the gratitude and something else, something he didn't have a name for. Maybe not, he said. The night deepened. Outside, the wind continued its low song. Inside, the fire burned steady, holding back the dark. And in that small cabin, 3 people who'd been strangers just a day before sat together, bound by circumstance and choice, waiting for whatever dawn would bring. They came with the sunrise. Caleb saw them from the window, 5 riders this time, not 3. Jack Dolan rode in front, flanked by his brothers and 2 others Caleb didn't recognize. They moved faster than before, with purpose, the horses' hooves churning up clouds of red dust. Claire, Caleb said quietly. She was already awake, sitting at the table with Anna. She looked up, saw his face, and understood immediately. Take her to the cellar, Caleb said, nodding toward the trapdoor in the corner. It's hidden under the rug. You'll be safe down there. Claire stood, lifting Anna into her arms. What about you? I'll handle it. Caleb. Go now. She hesitated for only a moment, then moved quickly, pulling back the rug and lifting the heavy wooden door. The space below was small, dark, but it would hold them. She climbed down with Anna and Caleb low. Aired the door, sliding the rug back over it. He picked up the rifle, checked it one last time, and stepped outside. The riders stopped 30 feet from the cabin, spreading into a loose half-circle. Jack Dolan dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate weight. The others stayed on their horses, hands resting on their guns. Didn't expect me back so soon, did you? Dolan called out. Hoped you'd show more sense, Caleb replied. Dolan smiled, but there was no humor in it. Sense? You got my wife and child locked up in there, and you're talking to me about sense. They're not locked up, and they're not leaving. See, that's where you're wrong. Dolan took a step forward. I gave you a chance yesterday, told you to walk away, but you didn't take it, so now we do this the hard way. Caleb raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it yet, just making his intention clear. You draw on me, you better be ready to die. One of the men on horseback laughed nervously. Hell, Jack, he's just one man. That's right, Dolan said, his eyes locked on Caleb, just one man. He turned his head slightly, speaking to his brothers without looking away. Toby, you and Marcus go around back. Ellis, Cole watch the sides. Nobody goes in or out. The men started to move, but Caleb's voice stopped them cold. You take another step, I drop him first. The rifle was leveled now, aimed directly at Dolan's chest. Then I take as many of you as I can before you get me. Question is, which one of you wants to die second? The riders froze. Dolan's smile faded. "You're bluffing," he said. "Try me." The silence stretched taut as wire. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, sharp and mocking. The horses shifted, sensing the tension. Then, from behind Caleb, a voice rang out. "He's not bluffing." Caleb glanced back, his heart sinking. Clea stood in the doorway, holding his revolver in both hands. It was pointed at Dolan, her arms steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Clea." "I'm not hiding," she said firmly. "Not anymore." Dolan's expression shifted, surprise, then something darker. "Clea, put the gun down. You're gonna hurt yourself." "Stay back, Jack." "Clea, honey, you're being foolish. Come here, bring Anna. We'll go home and we can forget all this happened." "I'm not going back." "Yes, you are." His voice hardened. "You're my wife. Anna's my daughter. You don't get to just leave." "I already did." Dolan's jaw clenched. "You think this man can protect you? You think he gives a damn about you? He's just using you, Clea. Once he's done, he'll throw you out like everyone else." "You're wrong," Clea said. "He's shown me more kindness in 2 days than you did in 5 years." Dolan's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful." "Enough," Caleb said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You got your answer, now leave." Dolan stared at him, breathing hard. Then he looked at Clea, at the gun in her hands, and something in his eyes went flat and cold. "All right," he said quietly, "you win." He turned as if to walk back to his horse, and then, in one smooth motion, he drew his gun and spun around. Caleb fired. The shot cracked through the morning air, echoing off the canyon walls. Dolan staggered, his gun falling from his hand. He looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, then back up at Caleb, his expression more surprised than pained. He fell to his knees, then forward onto his face. For a moment, no one moved. The other riders stared at Dolan's body, their faces pale. "Anyone else?" Caleb asked, his voice deadly calm. One of them, Toby, shook his head quickly. "No, sir, we're done." "Then ride out." They didn't need to be told twice. They turned their horses and rode hard, leaving Dolan's body behind in the dust. Caleb lowered the rifle, his hands steady but his heart pounding. He turned to Clea, who stood trembling in the doorway, the revolver still raised. "It's over," he said gently. She looked at him, then at Dolan's body, and the gun slipped from her hands. Caleb caught her as her knees buckled, holding her steady. "It's over," he repeated. She buried her face in his shoulder and wept. The days that followed were quiet. Caleb buried Jack Dolan on the ridge overlooking the canyon, not out of respect, but because it was the right thing to do. Clea didn't attend. She stayed in the cabin with Anna, beginning the slow work of healing. They didn't talk about leaving, not at first, but as the days turned into weeks, the question began to settle between them, unspoken but present. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Anna asleep in the back room, Clea finally asked, "What happens now?" Caleb looked at her, saw the uncertainty in her eyes. "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know," she paused. "I thought we'd leave, that we'd keep moving, find someplace new, but," she trailed off, glancing around the cabin, "I don't know if I want to anymore." "You're welcome to stay," Caleb said quietly, "as long as you need. What if it's longer than that?" He met her gaze, saw the hope there, fragile and tentative. "Then it's longer." She smiled, small but real. "Anna likes it here, she likes you." "I like her too." "And me?" Clea asked, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb reached out, his rough hand covering hers. "You too." Years later, travelers passing through the canyon would sometimes stop at the small ranch nestled against the ridge. They'd see the man working the land, the woman tending the garden, and the girl, grown taller now, laughing as she chased after the horses. They'd ask for water, for directions, and the man would always oblige, his manner quiet but kind. And if they looked closely, they'd see the way the woman watched him, the way the girl called him Pa, and they'd know without asking that this was a family built not from blood, but from something stronger. From choice, from kindness, from a knock on a door in the dead of night, and a cowboy who gave them his bed and never asked them to leave. And in the evening, when the work was done and the fire burned low, they would sit together and remember how it all began, with just one night in the barn, a plea for mercy, and a man who chose to answer it.